Alright, hello once again. We're going to continue to work on membranes. We're going to finish off on cutaneous membranes. So cutaneous membranes, this was the last part that we worked on in our last video. Once again, you're going to use the packet found on Google Classroom. It should say Section 1 Notes. This is all involved in Section 1 Notes. We talked about the cutaneous membrane being the skin. In general, it's a drier membrane. It's the outermost protective membrane. We talked a little bit about the superficial epidermis being the outer layer. We talked about the protein keratin and what that function was. We actually drew some of the cells, the stratified squamous cells associated with this membrane, and our final component is C. When we're talking about the cutaneous membrane, we're talking about an underlying dermis. There's an underlying dermis associated with this membrane, and this type of dermis is mostly dense connective tissues. Alright, our next membrane we're going to talk about involves the mucous membrane. You also might see this in your notes or when we talk about in class is the mucosa or mucus in general. This is another example of a surface type covering, a surface type lining. For letter A, we know it's a surface epithelium that secretes mucus. What's unique about this though, and once again remember on your diagram for notes I have added some information in this, so don't get off track with that. But for number one, the type of mucous membrane depends on the site or the location, and you can see from this diagram the mucosa membranes are located in different areas internally. We also know that for number two, these cells secrete mucus, and we should remember this a little bit from our tissues component, goblet cells. Goblet cells are the cells that secrete mucus that traps particles and that lubricates material moving throughout and within these systems. So an example of where we talked about the goblet cells were the simple epithelium tissues, and specifically the simple columnar. And you remember those columnar cells were cells that lined areas associated with the digestive system. Okay, for number B, something else about mucosous membranes, we know that they're underlying loose connective tissue that binds those cells and membranes to other areas of the body. Generally, these are underneath the epithelium, and you remember the epithelium is the outer covering. So for number one, these types of membranes are generally found underneath the epithelium. But what's unique about these types of membranes for letter C is that these membranes line all body cavities that open to the exterior of the body surface. So you can see within this diagram, these are cavities that are open to the exterior. In this case, it's through your nasal cavity or your mouth. So these cavities are open to the exterior environment through those types of areas. And number D, we've talked about this before. If you just look through at that diagram, you can definitely tell that these membranes are directly associated with absorption or secretion of material. Okay, our next type of membrane involves the serous membrane, also associated with, and that was the serous lining. The serous membranes are lining specific, and you can kind of see within this diagram these types of membranes line cavities or they line specific organs, which we'll talk about. So for number A, surface of simple squamous cells from a covering standpoint. So letter A, we know that these membranes have a surface of simple squamous epithelium type cells. We also know for number one, if you can remember, use your notes if you need to, draw a few simple squamous cells. And what I made mention of for number two is serous, if you remember, equals lining, and it lines components in body cavities in general. And you can just identify with these cavities. That has something to do with your heart and lungs, and the cavities in your body is associated with that. You can see the second one here deals with your digestive system in general. So the serous for number two equals linings of body cavities, and there's three cavities we're going to talk about. We'll get to that in the next page, but the pleura, pericardium, and peritoneum cavities, which we'll continue with. But a few key terms in your diagram, in your note packet, you can see key terms, and these are going to be critical in helping explain this further. So one of the first key terms involves visceral. So when we're talking about visceral components in anatomy and physiology, we're talking about part of a membrane that covers organs inside a cavity. So visceral would be membranes that cover organs inside a cavity. Parietal is a portion of a membrane that is attached to the wall of that cavity. So there's a little bit of difference between the two. Visceral, we're talking about membranes that line or cover organs, and parietal, we're talking about membranes that attach to the wall of a cavity. Okay, serous membranes continued for letter B. We know that these membranes have an underlying areolar connective tissue, and this is something we should be familiar with. Once again, we had a number of clinical correlations with this type of tissue and in relation to our subcutaneous layer and injections and things along those lines. So for letter B, we know they have an underlying areolar connective tissue, and what I would like you to do for that part underneath that is write 3 things that you know about that tissue in general. Take a few seconds to do that. Okay, for letter C, what we know is that a difference between serous membranes and mucosous membranes is that these types of membranes generally line open body cavities that are closed to the exterior of your body. So you remember your mucosa membranes line the cavities that are open to the outside. Well, these guys line the cavities that are closed to the outside. Letter D with serous membranes. What's also unique about these membranes is they have serous fluid, and this fluid for letter D is unique in that it absorbs and lubricates areas in between cavities and organs where those membranes are interconnected. Alright, so for our next component in our notes, we're going to talk about specific serous membranes, and this is where we use some terms before. If I can find those terms, those are actually on your second page in your notes when we talked about serous lining cavities and where those linings actually take place, the pleura, the pericardium, and the peritoneum. And we'll get to those in a second. But let's start with letter A on the next component in our notes. So we know serous membranes continue, and we know there's specific serous membranes, and another term you might see in the next page or so is serosa membranes. It means the same thing. And remember, underneath that, serous membranes line body cavities. They do not open to the outside or exterior of the body. Let's start with the first cavity. This involves the peritoneum, and this is the abdominal cavity within your body and my body. And you can kind of see that from our diagram on the previous page. The peritoneum would be your abdominal cavity. The pleura, this is the cavity associated with the area around your lungs. Once again, let's look at this diagram to the right. You can see the pleura-based cavity with your lungs and the organs associated with that area. And finally, the pericardium. This should sound familiar to cardiovascular, pericardium, meaning the cavity and the lining around your heart. I think if you use the diagram to the right, it will help you with an understanding of these membranes and the cavities associated with them. So I don't know if you've ever taken, sometimes you receive a package in the mail, and it's kind of a delicate package, and what it has is those air-filled plastic containers associated with it to support and absorb the bumbling about when it's being transported. But if you've ever taken one of those and actually pushed in it, this type of relationship exists. So you can see your fist and the make-believe plastic container around your fist that might exist once you apply pressure to it. You can definitely see you'll have an outer wall, you'll have some type of inner area with fluid or air in it to absorb the impact, and you'll have an inner wall. And all 3 of these components deal specifically with areas lined by serous membranes. So at the bottom, we've got 3 things to write, and I want you to use what we've learned from serous membranes to help answer or finalize the definitions that we have at the bottom. So the 3 points at the bottom: parietal, serosa. Use what you know about those terms to finish this. Would be defined as what? Serous fluid would be defined as what? And visceral serosa would be defined as what? Okay, this video is just about done. Take what you've learned from it. Obviously, we'll cover it much more in depth and support with questions and things like that in class, and we'll go from there. If you have any questions, let me know. One last thing we want to do is my youngsters were with me today. The third one's not here. He's at daycare, but these guys wanted to introduce themselves, so go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jack Baumgartner. My dad is your science teacher, and have a great day, Taylor. See ya.
Hi, my name is Lily, and
Finish her up.
I don't know.
Okay, say bye.
Bye.